So it is Sunday today and the weather outside is pretty crappy. And so we're going to have a nice relaxing day off in front of the fire up here in the upstairs living room. And since we had this stove installed, we've had quite a few questions about how it works and how it's working for us. Some people want a bit more info about how the whole system actually works and how it interfaces with all the different parts. And then some people want to know how we are using it to heat our home and how we make decisions about when to use this instead of using the solar power to run our heat pump and underfloor heating. And so today we're going to capture the whole process from setting and lighting the fire, which we've already done, and monitoring the temperature in all the different parts of the system. There's actually 3 tanks involved in this system. We've got temperature sensors on each one, so we'll be able to look at the time, we'll be able to look at the temperature, and kind of show how it works across an entire day of use. Hopefully that's interesting and not too weird and technical. So for now, I'm going to sit back and relax and watch the fire, and then we'll talk a bit more about how it works a bit later on. When Theo came around the other day, he said, "Oh, I see you've got the African TV set up."
That's pretty much it.
Mm.
My favourite pastime. Fire, knitting. Normally there's a glass of wine. It's a bit too early.
Okay, let me quickly set the scene in terms of the time, the temperature as a kind of a base starting point, and then soon I'll also give a bit of an overview of how the system works for anyone who has not seen any of our previous videos. So in Portugal, they call this kind of wood-burning stove a salamander, and it is a firebox, but with a water tank out the back of it. And the idea is you burn wood, and that heats the water in the back. And then that water can be diverted wherever you want, to radiators, to underfloor heating, to a water tank, or any combination of those kinds of things. And so today we lit the fire just after 12 o'clock, and at 12 o'clock the temperature in the tank inside the salamander was 20 degrees. And as we've been chatting and filming and stuff like that, over the course of about 15 to 20 minutes, the temperature in that tank has now gone up to 44, 45 now. And when it gets to that temperature, around 45, then a pump downstairs kicks in and starts circulating the water from the salamander into our big 300-litre water tank and also into a smaller 60-litre buffer tank as well. I'll go downstairs a bit later on and show you all of that stuff in place. But in order for this whole thing to work, we first need to get the water in the salamander tank up to temperature, then the pump kicks in and starts circulating it around. The water in the back of the salamander continues to heat up, and then that heat is passed into the bigger tanks downstairs. I just heard a noise in the background, and you can now visually see there's a couple of green lights on this thermostat upstairs in the room that we're sitting in. That shows that the pump downstairs has kicked in.
One thing to mention is the water cycles around for quite some time because the water in the big 300-litre tank has to reach a certain temperature before it will then feed into the underfloor heating. And that normally takes somewhere between an hour and 2. So we often sit up here enjoying the fire, watching that so that we can get the big tank downstairs up to the certain temperature. And then we know that, okay, now it's starting to heat the underfloor heating circuits.
So in addition to monitoring the temperature up here in the salamander, we're also going to monitor the temperature in the 300-litre Daikin tank downstairs and the temperature of the underfloor heating circuits as well. And when we started at 12 o'clock, the hot water tank downstairs, the big 300-litre tank, was at 42 degrees, and the temperature in the underfloor heating loop was 35. So whilst we've got the fire running upstairs and everything is heating up nicely, I thought I'd bring you downstairs into the room directly below to show you all the components of the system and give you a bit of an overview of how everything flows and what happens at different temperatures during the running of the fire. So the wood burner is directly above here, and this copper pipe that you can see in the background is the hot water that comes out of the salamander and down into the 300-litre Daikin tank. Now this is part of a heat pump system. The outdoor unit is directly on the other side of this wall. So whether we're using the heat pump outside or the salamander upstairs, heat is transferred into water in this big tank. But when we're running the salamander, a couple of other things happen as well. When the water in the salamander tank gets above 45 degrees, this pump here engages, and that pumps water through this 60-litre buffer tank back up into the salamander, and then that comes down into the 300 litre tank. And that flow continues under normal operation. So as the wood burns upstairs and the water in that small tank in the salamander is heated, that hot water passes into the big tank and then flows through into here and then back up again. So that's how everything works under normal operation, but there are a couple of safety features as well. The first one is designed to protect the sensitive components inside of the big Daikin tank. And so if the water in that tank goes above 75 degrees, then there is a valve that automatically closes and diverts the flow of the water so that it skips the big tank and just goes straight into the buffer tank. So the water from the salamander upstairs comes down, straight into the buffer tank and then back out again. And then once the big tank has been bypassed and it cools down a little bit, once that temperature drops into a safe range, the valve automatically reopens and the normal flow of water is resumed. The second safety feature relates to the salamander tank upstairs. Because that tank is quite small and potentially if we have a big fire in there, the water can heat up quite quickly. So if the temperature in the salamander tank approaches 95 degrees Celsius, then a different valve opens and that water is ejected to the outside of the building. And then another valve opens up on the buffer tank to bring cold water into the system to cool everything down. And so you can just about see this white pipe up here. That actually goes through the wall here and runs down the side of the building. That is where the 95-degree water is ejected. And then on this left-hand side of the buffer tank, cold water can come in to cool down the whole system. And so what I've just described is the process of how the water is heated and how it is moved around the system into the 300 litre tank. And that 300 litre tank is then connected to all of our domestic hot water, so taps in the kitchen, bath, shower, and all that kind of stuff. But that 300 litre tank is also capable of heating the water for our underfloor heating system as well. And as long as the room thermostats are calling for heat, the pump in the Daikin tank will engage and it will push that hot water around all of the loops in our downstairs underfloor heating. So hopefully that explains how the system works. If you do have any questions, stick them down below and we'll do our best to answer them, or we can pass them on to the guys who know much more about this system, the guys at Klimash who installed it for us. Okay, I'm going back upstairs to sit by the fire. I've no idea if that made any sense or not, but hopefully it's useful to somebody.
So one of the other things that a couple of people have asked about is the comfort level, particularly sitting in front of the fire, because I know that there is a lot of wood burners with back boilers that put out 50% heat, so 50% goes into the back boiler and 50% goes to heat the room. This is much more like 90-10. There's not that much heat that comes forward, a little bit if you sit quite close, so it's really comfortable to sit here.
As in it's not too hot?
Yeah, it's not too hot. Someone in the comments was like, after a couple of hours it's too much and they have to leave the room. It's definitely not like that here. Of course we have some window drafts and etc. However, I think even when those are all blocked up, it's really not putting out too much heat. Interestingly though, when you go up into the loft space, the heat coming out of the flue is heating that space and probably the stuff that comes out and then goes up. It's definitely nice and cozy up there. I was up there the other day doing some work on the door and it was lovely. I was working in a t-shirt and it was really cold and windy and rainy outside and I was like, oh, this is quite nice. I should just bring an armchair up here and sit up here. So it's not too hot, but it's doing what we hoped it would do, which is you can sit in front of the fire and be comfortable and have a glass of wine. And up there, we're not going to have any additional heating, so it will in the winter provide a really nice temperature up there so that we can be up there doing our creative things. And I'm so impressed. I mean, I find like I can sit here and be too cold still, but I think that is just to do with the drafts. I have a little thermostat and it goes up by 1 or 2 degrees sitting here, and that's after 4 hours or something, so it's really quite comfortable. And it has made it so nice for us to have this area where we can come up and sit, as well as where we kind of have the TV area. Just 2 different spaces. This is much more of a device-free zone where we just come up and put some music on and we chat and have a glass of wine, or I knit and monitor the fire. And so it's really perfectly worked exactly how we wanted it when we kind of designed all of this together.
Okay, let's have a bit of a check-in with our temperatures. The salamander tank is now up to 51 degrees, and that's after about an hour. And the big Daikin tank downstairs has gone up to 45. So that is 3 degrees increase in about an hour, but it does tend to ramp up exponentially. So 51 in the salamander, 45 in the Daikin tank after about an hour. And in this room it is 18 degrees and 72% humidity. So we've talked a little bit about what the system is and we've shown you how it works. We should probably talk about why we have the wood burning stove and a heat pump at the same time. And it's because we are off-grid on solar power only here. And for the vast majority of the year here in Portugal, that is perfectly fine. In fact, for our domestic hot water, so bath, showers, hot water for dishes, stuff like that, we don't really need the wood burner. We have enough solar with our generator backup to do the whole year, even in the winter. And whilst Portugal is known as a very hot and sunny place, that is not true in the winter. The winter is wet, it is cold, and it is grey. And using a heat pump for space heating, rather than just domestic hot water, takes quite a lot of power, somewhere in the region of about 20 kilowatt hours per day. And whilst we have a decent number of solar panels and quite a lot of battery storage as well, we don't have enough to run heating throughout the winter. And so that is what the salamander is for. It allows the solar power to just run the house and all the appliances, lights, computers, TVs, sound systems, but also our ovens and induction hob as well. And then for the winter, we're using the salamander to do the underfloor heating and also the domestic hot water as well. And so this is the first year that we've had this installed. In fact, we've only really been using it for a few weeks now, but we really only anticipate using this for 3 or 4 months of the year. It is November at the moment, and we've had a run of really bad weather, but next week is going to be beautiful sunshine, so we won't need to burn wood, we can just use the heat pump instead. And of course we will track all of this over the year so we get a better idea of what the usage patterns are, but at the moment we're expecting about 3 or 4 months of burning wood for heating.
So as Guy said, we've had a run of 5 or 6 grey days, a lot of rain and not a lot of sun coming in. And a couple of people have asked us, like, what do we have to do? Like, what are the actions we have to take? How long does it take for the water to get up to temperature? So the grey day looks typically like this. The tanks downstairs are sitting at around 40, depending on whether we've had a bath, a shower, or how much hot water we've used. And the tank up here is about 20. So first thing in the morning, we come up and we start a fire. We run it for 2 to 3 to 4 hours, again, depending if we had a bath or used a lot of hot water. And then we let it die out. And then we come back in the afternoon, start it up again, and then run it through into the evening. And so that gets us our underfloor heating running for most of the day and until somewhere in the middle of the night, 2, 3 o'clock.
2, 3 a.m.
Oh, sorry, yes, 2, 3 a.m. in the morning, depending on how late we stayed up with the fire the night before. But the other night, I was up here till about midnight. I think it then fed the underfloor heating till about 4 a.m. And then we got up at 7 or 8 o'clock and started all over again. So there definitely is a period where it's not heating the floor, but that's fine. Like, it's warm enough now downstairs, especially since we're using it as a bedroom downstairs. It's actually a little bit too warm. And the way it works, thankfully, is you can really come in and sit with it for the first hour to get it up to the 45, 50 degrees. And then you can go away and just come back every 30 minutes and put another log in. And so it's not really very time intensive to manage the fire. And I quite like coming up here and sitting with it, particularly on a grey day.
Okay, it is now 2 p.m. and the water in the back of the salamander is at 67 degrees, and in the tank downstairs we are at 55 degrees. And I've got my phone here and I'll put it up on the screen so that you can see some of the things I'm looking at. We can see at the bottom, hot water tank is at 55, and at the top it says that the underfloor heating is at 42, and that's just because the water that is kind of still inside the underfloor heating loop in the tank has just warmed up a bit by being in a tank that is warmer than it was earlier. But the underfloor heating is actually off at the moment. But now that the tank has got up to a decent temperature, we can turn the underfloor heating on, and that will then start pumping the water through the circuits downstairs. And something else you might have noticed on my phone screen there is something called emergency mode active. Now this is something that we've had configured separately and recently so that we can get the system to work the way that we want it to work. But our situation is somewhat unique because we're on solar power and we don't want the heat pump to kick in to do the underfloor heating. We only want to use the wood burning stove. And so the guys from Klimash actually came back to do this reconfiguration. They ended up spending the whole day here playing around with all the different settings, adding some new breakers, adding a bit more cabling, and configuring some of the relay contacts inside the big Daikin tank. In fact, they were on the phone to Daikin, getting some support to do this slightly unusual configuration to match our needs. And to cut a long story short, they've essentially added an override switch that allows us to turn off the outdoor unit so that we only use heat from the salamander to do the underfloor heating. And that is exactly what we want. We don't want to use electricity from our solar system to heat the floor. We just want to use the heat generated from burning wood.
So we only just installed this salamander a month or so ago, but last year we did run our underfloor heating with just the heat pump. We were able to run it on days when there was lots of sun and excess sun, but then we had to turn it off when the sun went down, and certainly couldn't run it on grey days. And so what happened last year was we were constantly turning it on and off and having to monitor it a lot more and monitor our solar situation and our battery charge percentage. Whereas now we can run it a lot more, a lot longer, and it means it's a lot more comfortable. And that was always the plan. And also because in the future, maybe next year, maybe not, we'll also have underfloor heating on this floor. So the system has to be able to run hot water through 2 sets of big pipes, upstairs and downstairs. And definitely on grey days here in Portugal, there is not enough sun to produce the solar energy that we would need, and so we're going to have to use the salamander. But that was always the plan.
So underfloor heating is an interesting one because it's very efficient, but it takes a long time to warm up, and then it takes a long time to cool down. So ideally you want to run it low and slow, so at a lower temperature but for a longer period of time to keep that floor nice and warm constantly. Now, if you're on solar power and you've got intermittent sun or bad weather, then you can't run it all the time because we would just run out of electricity. So last year we were having to turn it on and off a lot, and so it never really warmed up properly and never stayed warm for long enough to heat the house. Whereas with this system, we can get it up to a much higher temperature, we can let it run overnight, and it works much, much better, which is great. So we should also have a look at some of the temperatures in the rooms downstairs as well. So we have 2 thermostats, one in the kitchen diner and one in the living room, which is also our bedroom at the moment because we're very much in the middle of lots of renovation work. But we can look at some of the temperatures and see some of the trends over the last few days that we've been running the system pretty much every day. So in the dining room at the moment, we are at 17.1 degrees, and in the living room, it's a couple of degrees warmer, it's 18.7. So the one in the dining room, the thermostat is positioned quite close to the back door, and it's a temporary door with lots of drafts around it. That's why it tends to be a little bit cooler in there across the board, whereas the living room is right in the middle of the building and doesn't have so many drafts, and so it stays a lot warmer for a longer period of time. In fact, if we click into some of the trends, we can take a look at the graph over the last few days. We were actually out yesterday, so we didn't have the fire on, and you can see the big dip in the graph. Whereas for the previous 4 or 5 days, it's been steadily going up, the temperature, from 16 up to almost 19 degrees in the dining room. And then in the living room, similar kind of thing. But you can actually see a little bit more of the kind of the day and night drop off. But it's definitely been warmer in there across the board. So from about 18, maybe 5 days ago, peaked probably around 20.5 2 days ago.
And so I think that some people will consider those temperatures a little bit too cold, but for us, it's perfect, mostly because the kitchen is a kitchen and you're active when you're in there, and so it's okay for it to be a little bit cooler. And then the other room is what we're currently using as a bedroom and a little bit of a mini lounge. On the lounge, we can sit with a blanket on our knees if we're a little bit too cold, or a jumper on, but it's already too warm down there for sleeping. And so it works out really well. Like, we're very comfortable with those temperatures, and we don't have to feed the fire too much to maintain those temperatures, which is really important.
So there we go. I think that's pretty much all we have to say about this system, how it works, why we've got it, how we're using it, and some of the temperatures and some of the time that it takes to actually run. But the short version of the whole thing is we're very happy with it. We love the way it looks, we love the way it works, and we love the fact that finally, for the first time in 5 years, we're actually comfortable inside this house. It's not finished, it won't be finished this year or next year, but we're at least comfortable now, and that is good. And for the rest of the day, we're going to sit here, chat, knit. I'm not going to knit, but Kylie's going to knit. We're going to feed the fire and probably have a refreshing beverage a little bit later on. But thank you for joining us. We will see you in the next episode. Bye for now.
Bye-bye. Bloody Mary? I'm just planning ahead.
Okay, good, because it's not even lunchtime. Oh no, I guess it is lunchtime.
What did you say it was? 2 o'clock? Yeah,
It's 2
that's
o'clock.
well past lunchtime.
No wonder I'm starving. Let me go and sort some lunch out.